Mhm. Mhm. All right. This thing is now switched to showing me how many people are currently viewing. Oh, that's very weird. I'll find out. The video thing now says it's 10 minutes into the video. I just started it. I'm not sure what you're talking about there. So right now I'm feeling there's a lot of discomfort. It's hard to say that it's about something specific. I imagine this is what I'll be exploring today. And there's a kind of stirring of the discomfort around my belly, sort of reaching up into my chest. A very, very slight ache across the top of my head, and an openness, like I have room to breathe through upper chest into my arms. I'll start with these physical descriptions, just a verbalization and an anchoring in physical experience, and in part to orient myself. There's a concept that um, Eckhart Tolle shares. There's the variations of this all over the place, and right now the way that he phrases it is on the top of my mind. He talks about there being a pain body. He talks about this sort of like a psychic parasite, the thing of I don't know what came over me, the urge to fight when in a conflict with someone that you're close to. Like when um, I don't experience it quite this way anymore, but uh, it used to be that in interacting with my girlfriend, there would be this. Sometimes I would get sucked into these spaces of I would see a point that I could make that would be very clear, that I could see would clarify a mental picture very much. It would highlight the ways in which there is an inaccuracy over here. But I could feel at the same time that going in that direction wasn't going to help things. I mean, that much still happens. But there would be this kind of energy, a sort of urgency of needing to say the thought anyway, in an attempt to push away the awareness that it's not the thing to say right now, or to incorporate that intuition into a worry trying to check mentally. And that mostly doesn't happen anymore. But when it would feel like there is some sort of force or an energy that would be pushing this this need to speak in a way that was going to produce an unpleasant interaction. It would often be that I would say this and she would have no idea how to respond. Or if you rewind about a year, she would get really judgy and sort of more spiritual than thou. We would get into our own little tangle, and that's her version, like her getting wrapped in her own activation. But this bit of, well, what is it that arises in me that wants me, that pushes for saying something that I know is going to produce a negative result, and that wants to push away the awareness of that fact to make sure that I take the action. So that's a small example of this general pattern that Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body. I've felt my own pain body. He talks about it like it's a singular thing, like, oh, is your pain body active? Like, um, there's like the metaphor gets a little funny here. It's like when trying to actually look at what is it that activates, there are a lot of specific patterns. Like There's one that's particularly active for me right now. It's this energy that feels sort of like it's a little bit like inflammation of the soul. um, mm, but it's inflammation along a very specific pathway, like um, whether the tendons of my wrist are inflamed versus the muscles from some kind of workout. That makes a big difference in terms of how the structure of the hand and arm feel and what kinds of things are going to be healthy for working with it and what kinds of problems are likely to arise if I ignore it or if I do things that aren't healthy for that structure. The same thing is true at the more subtle level. It's not that there is one pain body, it's that there's a subtle body in pain. And when the pain is active, it tends to, it becomes a little intelligent. um, yeah, I'm having a hard time thinking of another example for myself versus the one that's currently trying to be active. But it feels sort of like, in Tolle's terms, like there's been this dormant pain body that over the last 4-ish days woke up and wants to feed. And it's been tricky to orient. It's hard to stay in my body. And I can try to stay in my body, but it's glimpses. Like I'll get a snapshot and then I'll be back in thought. It's a little frustrating because I can see what it's doing, but it feels as though I can't do anything about it. But that's a part of the thought structure. It's part of the inflammation, though. I can't do anything about this. Oh, who said that? So I noticed that part of how I've been interacting with these videos, how I've been wanting to show up here, it's felt like there have been two forces, and I recognize, oh, neither of these are what I want to do. One is in the direction of, well, how about I just say the things that are on my mind? And it's, well, that has a similar flavor to the thing with my girlfriend. The other direction has been to sit back and digest until I have space to let the stillness speak more clearly through me. The problem with that latter one is that it's putting control as to whether or not I am in service to my deepest self. I think would be a fine way to say it. In service to the eternal. I'm putting whether or not I am in the moment, in touch with that and in service to that, in the hands of the sort of subtle inflammation. So to the extent that the subtle inflammation has a kind of intelligence, and it very much does, it specifically has my intelligence. It uses my mind in order to keep itself going. So it has my intelligence. It uses my computer. It can use the avoidance as part of its strategy for feeding on this negativity. So like I started noticing bits of shame showing up. Oh, I've missed another 2 days here. I think in total I've missed about a week of, about 7-ish days of these daily lives. Out of 77, that's not too bad. I'm still planning on doing a total of 100. And there's this, like the guilt. I think calling it shame is more appropriate. There's a sense of shame that tries to appear. There's just this sense of, wait, but that's not what I want to create. That's really not what I want to create. from rolling up the wizard sleeves. Okay, let me let's get to a little bit of spell work here. Recently, I've been rereading an old, my favorite book series when I was a kid, the Circle of Magic series by Deborah Doyle and James MacDonald. It's in some sense, it's sort of a Harry Potter-like story long before Rowling started writing. Yeah, I bet I'll have more to say about that. It's definitely a fantasy story centered on a boy who becomes a wizard. But it's through a lot of intentional choice, and the way that it captures things about the feeling of magic is just beautiful. It taps into something deep about the nature of spiritual truth. And it's got a whole bunch of other stuff in it that's just that I look at it and go, oh, these authors, they don't quite understand what all of these things are metaphors for. I'm talking about demons and elementals. Like, oh, there are real things that we could call those. And you can interact with them as intelligences, and it absolutely makes sense to do so. There's even a way to translate all of that entirely into a, well, not entirely, but like 98, 99% into a scientific materialist framework. It totally fits. It's just a matter of the right layers of abstraction where concepts get worked with. But when you think of, oh, like these are like these physical beings, there might happen to also be physical beings in some quirky way, but anyway, I'm getting a little lost in that. There's something beautiful and fun about it, and I look forward. Like that, I definitely want the space in my heart and in my body and the groundedness to share well from. So I want to get through this arc of inflammation first. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in me as a matter of processing and a matter of sharing. It speaks to a lot of the challenge that I've been having in these videos as well. Probably the most common theme that I have as a tension in myself here is that I see a lot and I understand a lot. And I have a strong desire to share. It's is struggling with a good metaphor for this. I'll give a bad metaphor for it, because this conveys something like the story type that the pain body likes to tap into. So there's a little bit of danger in saying it this way, but I don't have a better one right now. I will later, but saying this is part of how I get there. There's a feeling as though I am looking across the world and I can see. Actually, let me switch. Actually, I think I see a way to describe this. There's a way of viewing a sort of fusion of perspectives. There's this sort of tension. It's represented by the tension of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, but we don't need brain theory for it. You can see this in metaphors for the body and for health. The dominant paradigm for this, the overwhelming one that the Western world uses, and westernized world uses for medicine, is body as machine, body as mechanical. So you solve problems by recognizing what the mechanism is, how the gears turn. We don't talk about them as gears, but you actually zoom down on the molecular level, and they're talking about how the proteins interact with one another, and when you take a pill, what you're trying to do in terms of interfering with the protein's functions and changing them. It's extremely mechanical. Proteins are molecular machines. It's fascinating to watch even the computer simulations. We're just watching the way that like how an enzyme works. An enzyme is absolutely a molecular machine. It's just a protein. So this view is fantastic for when you're dealing with mechanical problems, like, oh, their bone is broken and it is sticking out through their muscle, and that is causing them a lot of pain because of the stimulation of the nerves and also potential for infection. How do we deal with this? And absolutely, if I have a compound fracture, I would love to get the assistance of Western medicine and a Western hospital. However, a lot of people have a lot of concern, I think rightly so, about Western medicine's ability to deal with anything long-term, such as how do I walk after I have broken my leg? Western medicine is really, really shitty at that one. Really bad at metabolic problems like dealing with diabetes or heart disease. There's a question of compared to what, but I think there are clear comparisons, but it's hard in our modern world to. It's like there's a versus that shows up. So rather than just ragging on Western medicine, what I want to do is highlight that there's an alternative that is very pragmatically something people use all the time, which the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty described as the body as lived, as opposed to the body as an anatomical object. The body as lived is, well, I'm being a little loose, and this isn't quite what Merleau-Ponty, Merleau-Ponty meant, but I'll massage things around because there's a feeling I want to convey here. That's, for instance, the inclination to orient to feeling. How do I feel in this moment? Do I have energy? When I am learning a martial arts move, how do I engage with that? I have to bring awareness into how I am moving my body. If I think of the body as a mechanical system and I am trying to move the bones in a particular way, that can help, but I have to reintegrate it with something larger, with something more holistic. This is, you find this flavor of orienting in traditional Chinese medicine. Sometimes, when I was studying Chinese medicine about 15 years ago, this is described as the body as a garden as opposed to the body as a machine. There's a sense of how do you grow capacities, and how do you remove the rot so that it doesn't infect the healthy parts of the system, and integrate the rot into the soil to provide nourishment for the rest of the living system and encourage a natural cycle. How do you engage in strengthening and relaxation and rest? How do you engage in a natural rhythm that's also in sync with the world around you? This kind of approach is a lot more helpful in practice for dealing with many forms of depression. It's tricky in our modern world because the modern world is set up in a way that systematically puts external pressure on a direction that is like depression. And it tries to deal with it by emphasizing this mechanical model. Oh, what's going on with the brain chemistry? Oh, you need to make sure that you are getting exercise. But a lot of the difficulty has to do with, do I feel fulfilled and integrated with my environment? Am I capable of being with my sadness? If I'm not capable of being with my sadness, where is the weakness in me? And how do I grow those capacities? I mean, these are things that, when I see people overcoming depression, and I'm picking on depression just as an example, there's nothing particular to depression, but I personally overcame a pretty significant amount of depression going through an arc like this. There's this, there's something about the mechanisms that produce this I mean, in language that I find myself leaning more towards, I keep finding myself wanting to say that the mechanisms are more subtle, they're more etheric, they're at the level of how you feel music genres, not at the level um, of how you feel a table or how you chew your food. Like those are, it's in some sense too simple and too mechanical, too gross. Although I don't mean disgusting. I mean like gross weight um, or gross income. Like the like coarse would be another way to say that. Too coarse, too unrefined, too bulky. There's the when talking about something like, oh well, um, there's a need to make sure that you are eating enough vegetables. Like, well, kind of. Like if vegetables are somehow a lack of vegetables are somehow, and I don't think anybody suggests, oh, eating vegetables will keep you from being depressed. But there are things like, oh, get more sunlight and make sure you're getting plenty of vitamin D. Well, okay. What's the cause of the deficiency? Right? And this doesn't address the fact that if you're really depressed, getting yourself to do anything is really hard. You should go find a therapist. Have you ever tried to find a therapist who's at all decent while you're depressed? It's hard. It's really tricky. The why don't you just is a very mechanical thinking. Oh, why don't you just move this here? Well, you're forgetting the fact that the thing you're moving is a you, including your capacity to move things. The mechanical thinking is really bad at self-reference. It's incredibly difficult. It has a really hard time with self-reference. So why am I talking about this contrast? Well, I see both vividly in the world. I don't think it's a one or the other. It's not like one of these perspectives is better than the other. If you're going to choose one, definitely choose the organic one, because there's lots of reasons for this. I sort of don't want to go into it too much, but the short version is that the organic version offers the context for which the mechanical version makes sense. But the mechanical version can't do that for the organic version because of the trouble that it has with self-reference. And because of that, the tendency is for the mechanical version to shut out the organic version. So if you want to have any hope of benefiting from both, you need to anchor in the organic one. This is not a specification about metaphor, it's something about the feeling orientation. How does mattering work? Mattering works based on the lived integrated experience of the present moment, not based on a theory. The theory comes after the lived integrated experience of meaningfulness. That's not just an abstraction, that's something that you can see, feel. It's in the bones, it's in the flesh, it's in the heart. So I see this not just at this level of abstraction, but at very practical details. Like in this book that I've been reading, there's although it shows up in the Harry Potter world too, there's something about the attitude of the instructors towards the children. And it has this attitude of, are you talking back to me? 5 points from Gryffindor. Like there's this the punishment tone, but it's not just that punishment is being inflicted. It's not just the threat. It's the fact that it's this emotional hooking and this manipulation, this based on superiority and power, and that the use of that is aimed at stunning, stupefying the minds of the children and the hearts as well. It's transferring trauma. The natural question from from my perspective, but I think this is, but part of what I'm seeing about this being like, it's not mine. It's that I happen to see through this perspective, and the point is that the perspective isn't mine, it's universal. This is like talking about my mathematics. No. When you see the truth that mathematics is pointing at, it's not your truth, it's the truth. You just happen to see it. And this is the same thing. It's absolutely the same thing. There's a clarity of seeing the world that when I look at this, it seems to me incredibly obvious that the natural question to ask when seeing something in the world that is like, this is a bad thing. And here's a bad thing. Like deforestation, the chopping down of the Amazon, the threats of climate change, the way that politics got in the way of our ability as a species to react in any sane way to this pandemic. The challenges of censorship and the discussions of censorship that are going on, or mostly not going on because of censorship, around and anything having to do with the virus, basically. All of these things and many more, right? The question of, oh, is there something bad going on? There's this, like if you imagine that you're watching a child and the child is doing something naughty. Well, obviously the thing to do is discipline them, right? Like they just ran around and drew on crayon on the wall. When I was a little kid, at one point I took a spray bottle of cooking oil and ran around the house gleefully squirting the walls. And I think I was like 3. And it turned out that that stuff just soaked into the paint and into the wall, and there was no way to paint over it and no way to clean it. And that was an issue for that house for years. I didn't know it would have that effect. It was just like, hey, it's a spray bottle and it creates neat shimmery stuff. So clearly the thing to do is discipline the child, right? Because they're acting badly and you need to discipline them. What's the discipline for? Oh, you need to make them behave. What do you mean by behave? Oh, come on. Like there's a circularity to the reasoning that is very much the mechanistic attempt to seal off insight that the machine view doesn't make sense. The sane and kind thing to do when encountering a child doing something naughty is first you do the immediate intervention that's needed on the time scale of seconds. This particular metaphor gets blown up way too much. It needs to be time scale of seconds. If you're in danger on time scale of seconds or maybe minutes, it makes sense to do something urgent. But even if it's going to take an hour or more before there's a problem, it no longer makes sense to bring in this level of urgency. I'm talking on the level of, did the kid just set the refrigerator on fire? My cousin actually did that once. As like a little kid. And he tried to run away because he was afraid of being in trouble, which is part of the point. Is the kid playing in the street, and it's just a matter of time before a car comes ripping around the corner, right? On that time scale, it makes sense. The first thing to do is to intervene to make sure that there is a capacity to have a conversation later. But once it is possible to have a conversation, the next thing that happens is exploring, raising curiosity. This is not necessarily about how to interact with the kid, but this is definitely an internal orientation. What caused the behavior? Maybe the kid doesn't know, but that's a property of the kid. As the adult, it's possible to orient to the whole situation and go, well, what were the actual causes? What were the actual causes? Stopping at the cause is the kid is being naughty. I mean, what does that even mean? I mean, what do you mean by naughty? And why was the kid being naughty? What caused the naughtiness? Kids don't come in with like a bottle of naughtiness and a free will switch where they just decide, you know what, I'm going to be naughty now. Like this. Like they might do that after a while in an attempt to feel their own capacity to choose things independently of adults. but that arises because of the pressure that the adults bring about naughtiness, about being bad, about making sure that you behave, and creates a form of pain so that part of what exploring free will and power means by the time they get to the terrible twos involves, especially when they get to about 3, it involves exactly exploring the thing that is being suppressed. So, what is being suppressed? Oh, they're being naughty. What does that even mean? So that glitch of perception and reasoning, this is a microcosm. It's absolutely crystal clear when dealing with kids. Maybe it's not crystal clear in hearing me talk about this. Maybe you have different opinions. That's fine. I'm right. This is a simple thing about what does it mean to raise children to be sane and kind and powerful, open-hearted. I mean, of course there's a practical level. Of course there's a practical level of keeping them safe. But if you are keeping them safe by trying to enforce certain behavioral norms over the course of hours and days and weeks, there's something missing. As if not because the behavior that you want to encourage them is inherently wrong, but because the attitude of enforcing is bringing in something that creates pain, and then that pain builds the pain body. It's part of how adults' pain bodies transfer to children. So that's actually an example of a much more general mechanism. We see this in the world when I look at something like, there's all of this business with climate change and these evil corporations, that these oil companies are being selfish. So what's causing them to be selfish? There's nothing on that first level. There's nothing on the time scale of seconds or minutes to intervene on in order to make it possible to have the conversation. Okay? Like, it's too slow. It's far too slow. There isn't an analog. There is, in fact, an languages. Is, in fact, something that if you were to scale it up, there is something about, well, how could society intervene on what is going on with oil companies? Because the time scale scales up, there is something about that absolutely makes sense. But that isn't what it feels like on the individual scale. That's how it looks. From the individual perspective, you watch and see these giants interacting slowly. But as an individual, your time scale is now. So if there is a sense of we can't have this second conversation or explore what causes these companies to do it. Oh, it's because they're selfish. Well, what does that mean? It means they're naughty. It means they just should be different. It's ignoring the question. It's absolutely ignoring the question. I'm grabbing this as just one example because this came up as part of a system that helped to feed my pain body a couple of days ago. I'm not saying anything about it being irrelevant to care for this dimension of the world. I'm not saying it's irrelevant to deal with what's going on with how oil companies pay off various politicians and the way that they bury green technology that could actually work. I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm highlighting that orienting to it with the same attitude as trying to deal with a crying child by slapping them might not help. And treating it like it is an emergency, so you are going to tape the child's mouth with duct tape to deal with the screaming because their screaming is creating too much of a problem. Like there's a way at which if you were orienting to a child the way that individuals often try to orient to these giants, it would be extremely clear that it's abusive. the fact that the giants are themselves abusive doesn't excuse it. That's like saying, well, the child set the refrigerator on fire, so they should be spanked. What does should mean there? What are you talking about? So I'm sort of meandering across a bunch of things, and I haven't tied this back to this business of the mechanical versus the organic, although I'm implicitly doing so. It's interwoven, organically, it's interwoven throughout everything that I'm saying here. There's something that I see with absolute clarity, with the kind of clarity of a mechanic who's looking at a machine, looking under the hood and going, oh, this is exactly how the machine is put together. This is where the clunking is. This is why you're getting smoke. Here's what would need to happen in order to deal with it. But I also see that this machine is contextualized within the organic context, and that what this machine is about is how the arising of the organic works. There's a way where there is, in fact, a way to work around the inability of the mechanistic system to think in terms of self-reference. And this is so clear to me. And the whole reason that I'm doing this video series is because one of the implications of what I see, this is a place where I keep getting caught up. It is really tricky for me. I have this gravitational pull to making a known mistake. One of the implications is that all, I don't mean almost all, I mean all of the control is in internal work. This is not to deny things like, well, I'm able to pick up the cup. That seems like an external thing. I choose to move the hand. But the thing is that where does the choice come from? How did I learn to move my fingers? How did I learn what a cup is? This wasn't because I was controlling the world. That comes afterwards. It's as an infant, I worked on. Right? I was observing this reflection, but the internal experience is of how do I move and orient to these very subtle new things of my experience? The same thing, you can watch the same thing in like 8-year-olds. It's not particular to 8 per se. It's like this range from like 6 to 10-ish. Although by the time they're 10, the ego has started to settle in solidly enough, and they've started to own enough of the pain body that there's it's a little less clear. It's just become a little less clear. This is not necessary. Part of there's a lot of pain here. Part of what I want for this world is for that to not be true anymore. I want to see the same clarity that you can see in the eyes of a child when they first learn how to reach for something. Like when they sit up and they look around and there's a world and they can choose to interact with it. The brightness in the eyes of a child at that age. We're talking less than a year old. Yeah, maybe around 1, depending on the developmental arc here. But like if you look at their eyes, they go from being something like a conscious lump of flesh to this sense of wonder and intensity. That's available throughout their lives. And when you know what to look for, you can watch it being crushed. It hurts. It hurts me. I want the perception. I don't want to become blind to this ever. What I want is to clearly see that this this pain has been addressed. So in that range of like 6-ish to 10-ish, you can watch how kids will play with their bodies. Right? And there's this playful interaction, and the way that they're at that point they're also playing a lot with social interaction and social dynamics, having best friends and trying to figure out, hey, he started it, or and that's not fair, and hey, let's play this thing, and there's this energy. This really starts most clearly right around 4-ish, right? Because that's when theory of mind starts to come on board, but it becomes quite clear by the time they're about 6. There's this beautiful exploration, but all of the exploration is happening from inside. It's just that they're starting, because of this inheritance of the pain body, they're starting to forget how to experience it that way, and are starting to view it as trying to manipulate the world around them. Starting to get locked more into the mechanistic framework that the westernized world has become obsessed with. So, and I'm giving these as examples. I don't mean this as an argument. I'm trying to point at something that is just obviously true. It's just very hard to see in the way that the world is set up. So this puts me in a, for me, tricky position. I don't mean like a lot of times when people say that, and sometimes when I say that, there's this almost manipulative tone, and that's not what I mean. Like, oh, this puts me in a tricky position. Let me explain to you why I'm powerless. I mean this more like it's tricky to stand on one foot and then close your eyes and stay on balance. It turns out that for most people, a tremendous amount of balance is visual. So when you cut out the vision, all you've got is the inner ear and the proprioception, which is to say your sense of which way gravity is pulling and your sense of your body in space. That's enough to balance correctly, but in practice, most people haven't developed the skill of using those senses alone. You use vision so much, in part because the way that vision is so strongly connected to the mechanistic thing. That's why we have such prevalent metaphors of you need to see what I mean, or do you see what I mean? Is this clear? That's not the only reason for those metaphors, but anyway, letting myself get off track. I lost track of where I was going. This, yeah, my mind just dropped what I was saying. I was in the middle of an arc. I just completely dropped it. And that's okay. Oh, tricky. A place this puts me that's tricky. So it's tricky, like learning to balance without vision. And that trickiness is about I want to see the reflection of the clarity that I have in the world. There's this feeling of, and this is, I'll highlight where the slip happens. If everyone could see what I do see, if everyone saw what I see, this is not a matter of belief, this is a matter of looking. If everyone saw what I see, almost all of this pain would evaporate. I see exactly why. It's implicit in what this scene is. So for me, and I can also see specifically, this is a place where, this is part of where the pain body came up for me in particular. I felt particularly unseen over the course of the last 4-ish days. and have been rehearsing how I am unseen. And when I do that, it's about me. And it's highlighting the way in which I'm making an internal mistake here. I'm pretending that it's about trying to do things in the world. I think that when I am trying to highlight this, when I'm trying to offer this vision forward, a particular bit of pain in me comes back to me very readily along the lines of I think it's easy to hear what I'm saying as what is happening in the world doesn't matter, or that I don't care, or here's a fun abstract theory. It's not about an abstract theory, it's about dealing with the core. I've said many times, and I still stand by this, almost all activism is anti-helpful. Almost all activism is anti-helpful. And this is not a claim about the causes that activist efforts are directed at. This is not a claim about the conscious intentions of the people who are engaged in activism. This is a claim about the structure. This is looking at, actually examine what are the strategies of most forms of activism. Or it depends on how you want to define most. I'm defining it etherically. I'm defining it in terms of volume of impact on the collective psyche and on the movement of hearts and emotions. If the world were a song, what instrument is activism playing and what kind of music is it playing? That's contributing more to the feel of the field than the number of people who are intending one thing or another, although they are linked. There's definitely a link. When I say that, when I say all of that, I don't, and I look at things like, yeah, environmentalist activism is anti-helpful. I don't mean something like environmentalism isn't a problem. I mean the things that cause environmental problems come from something like the world being in a mosh pit and everybody is using knives to jab one another and trying to enter this mosh pit with a strategy. Like, I'm going to go in with my knife and here is my strategy for how I'm going to dive through and jab the right people, jab the right villains, so that we can finally end the knife fight. I don't care what the strategy is. Maybe, somehow, in some vast abstraction somewhere, there is some kind of strategy where that would work. But it's not one any human is ever going to implement. We're not going to find it this way. This is not a claim about, are knife fights secretly good? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that strategy will never work. It will never work. It can create a weird impression like it is if you dive in there and you start jabbing the right people and you see them falling and there's an impression of a certain area where some people collapse. And then there's a little less fighting in that area. You go, aha, look, that's success. Yeah, except for when somebody else chooses to identify that action as villainous. Like, there are too many people, there are too many dynamics. It's that approach cannot work. It will never work. So, the key place for me is where I keep wanting to, and I was trying to highlight some of the difficulty that I run into there. The key place of difficulty for me is that I keep wanting to spin metaphors like that, and I keep wanting to articulate things in a way that there's this part of me, this bit of pain body, that wants to press on other people. You need to pay attention to your own inner workings. As soon as I say that, I can see the hypocrisy. But it doesn't stop the upwelling. And I still, even now, I'm still in a position where I do not have the capacity to bring enough vigilance to be perfect in this way. There's a lot of sorrow about that. Because I have a lot of clarity about the fact that I can see how this works. I can see, if I want to see this reflection become more beautiful, part of it involves recognizing, that I'm the one perceiving a knife fight, and that what it means to enter the knife fight is to try to pressure or manipulate others. So I'm trying to press this clarity. And to be more specific, to go farther back in the causal chain, to go more subtle. The fact that I have this automatic uprising of an inclination to pressure other people into paying attention to what I see. That's where the difficulty lies. So over the last many days, I've felt a lot of this build up, because there's something like there's an inclination to be victimized by all of this. Something like if the world were a little more willing to look where I'm pointing, then it would be easier for the world to support me as I try to clean up this mess in me. That's been a lived, embodied form of victimhood that I've carried with me for a long time. It's not fair. Yeah. I do want to be clear in all of this that there's a little bit of pressure there. That's not what I want to do. I want to fully embody the implications of what I see. It's just, it gets really frustrating when the fact that I am shy of that gets used as a reason to not listen to me. Because what that's doing is it's exactly poking the inflamed part of my subtle body, of my emotional system as it's revved. It's super tricky, and that's on me. I know that's on me. And that's a lot of what I've been wrestling with these last several days. It's not. I want to also be clear. Like some of this was certainly poked by at least one comment that I saw on one of my video last time. But this isn't predominantly about that. This was happening before I posted the last video. Part of the business was that the last video. I was trying to ground in the meaningful, and I kept finding myself sucked into my mind, and it was frustrating, and I could see the process, but I was like, well, this is what I can do, but what I'm seeing is still accurate. Like that, the accuracy of what I'm seeing does not vary between these different states of how grounded, how inflamed, etc. I sometimes add things that don't need to be added, but what I see is clear. I see is very, very clear. So yeah, so it's just been a bit of extra challenge for me to breathe over these last few days. But I wanted to mention, in particular, in case the person who helped to poke there wanted to emphasize that I know it's about me. I know that this business is about me. It's not about you. And this was prior to anything you were saying there. So, okay. I have a meeting to get to, so I'm going to sign off now. If you listened through all of this, thank you for listening. And I mean, not as a promise to anyone else, but just as a matter of informing. I've been skipping quite a few days, and it's my intention to get back to just doing these every day through to the end. I think it's doing good work for me, and I want to keep up with that.